What you're looking at here is embossed leather. It is made to look like a weave in this particular case, and here you have more of a southwestern vibe going on. This is from Weaver Leather, and they sent it over to me and asked me to experiment. Every time I show somebody my leather bags, they ask me if I've made a Dopp kit yet. In this video, I'm going to experiment with making a Dopp kit. A lot of people are looking for a Dopp kit. Apparently, it's become very popular. You could also call it a shaving kit or a travel kit. It's a zipper bag you would keep your toiletries in. So that's what I'm going to experiment with in this video, is making a Dopp kit with this textured leather. I did a little bit of research and I came up with this pattern I found online. I reinterpreted it to my particular scale, size, length, width. I already made one off camera, but I used a leather that was a little bit thicker than this. So these are going to be probably a little bit easier to make than the sample that I made. In the end, I'll compare and contrast this leather versus the one I made off camera. And I'm going to make one out of this leather as well. First thing we need to do is lay out and cut this pattern out of these pieces of leather. Here's the pattern I made. You notice that there's tape lines on it because I adjusted it a couple of different times. When I made the pattern itself, I folded up the cardboard to give me some scale, and I adjusted it as needed, and that's why you see that it's taped and put back together. And I did make one off camera, which I'm going to show at the end, and so I was very much into the size and scale that it comes out to. And here I'm just cutting up the leather with a razor blade, and here the leather is a little too floppy for me. It didn't really have as much body as it really should to be able to keep its shape. And one thing I like about leather work is when you use leather thick enough to keep its shape, kind of like my bigger bags that are puzzled together on the side. They're 10-ounce leather. This is like 1, maybe 2-ounce leather. So here I just spray glued a piece of felt to the back. I'm using 3M77 spray, and I'm just using a razor blade to put it on there. And now this is the southwestern one, and I had a little bit of this southwestern pattern that I got at, I think I got this at Joann's Fabrics, and it's a little bit more of a fleece, so I had to roller it on there tightly just to make sure that that would squish down, and it didn't razor blade well, so I'm just using a pair of scissors that I got from Weaver that are deadly sharp. It's always important to have good sharp scissors. You can get those from Weaver. And I need to put a zipper on here. Here you can see the pieces I'm just feeling, and they feel like they have enough body to be able to hold its shape. Now this is the one part that's exposed. The zippers fall behind each one of these parts when the bag is fully assembled. And I'm creating a seam there, just using some spray glue, and just the cardboard will mask so I could have spray on both sides of where that fold's going to land. I put it on there and I tap it with a hammer. That helps instill the shape that it's going to remain. I will obviously stitch it, but it's always good. These rollers are available on the Weaver website. Just get yourself a roller. Now where the zipper is going to go, that's going to be an exposed edge. So I'm painting some edge coating on there just to seal the edge and get rid of any fuzz. Plus it looks a little bit better when you don't see the open cut leather. Here's the zipper. It is taped down to my cutting mat. And this is the first side, so I want to ensure that it's going to be straight. And this is a machinist ruler. I'm using that as my weight, and you'll notice I could focus the press by tilting it up the way I do. Now it's about an hour later, and I'm gluing the other side of the zipper. Of course, this will get stitched on the machine, but it helps to know exactly where it's going to live instead of trying to manipulate it through the machine and everything sliding around on each other. Plus, it's important, you don't want the bag to be shifted or twisted. This way you know that the zipper is going to live together nicely. So I have the zipper glued into position on both bags. And now it's time. I have to sew it from the inside out or from the outside in, however you want to call it. I have to turn them inside out. And I need to get rid of the zipper so that I have a lot of flexibility with the bags while I do some of the sewing. So I cut off the zipper stop right here. And I just make sure that the scissor goes between the teeth. And now I pull the zipper completely off. And I'll be able to get it on later. Just don't lose it. Put it in a safe place. And now I'll be able to sew this. I got to do some of the key sewing parts. Obviously, sewing the zipper is one of the most important first steps, and those rolled over hems at each extreme end of the bag. And then I will need to put that zipper back in place and start preparing the bag to be sewn inside out. Now I got to go to the sewing machine. And you can see just I'm being gentle because that's a glue joint. This is that rolled over edge, which is the extreme end on the short sides. That's going to show, so I'm trying to do a double stitch on that hemline there. I'm using white stitching, and this is my Weaver 303, which is a really nice medium duty machine. It's good for light stuff and medium heavy stuff. And it really rock and rolls, and it has a walking foot, which is great. This is perfect for doing car interiors, heavy jeans, canvas, and of course leather. A little bit of rubber and foam. And now I'm throwing 2 stitch lines down. The first stitch line holds the edge of the leather, and the second stitch line holds the edge of the zipper on the inside where it's overlapping the fabric, the interior fabric. And whenever I throw a stitch down, I throw them both from the same direction. I don't want to stitch one way and then turn the whole thing around and stitch the other way, because that'll cause the fabric on top of each other to shift. You're pushing in one direction, you want to start the zipper at the same and push again if you're going to do 2 lines of stitching. Start and stop at the same end. Now reset and go back to the beginning again. That's my advice. Otherwise you're going to end up shifting the fabric around between the stitch lines, and then you're going to have an odd shape that's never going to go away. Like I always say, you learn on the first one. Here I'm doing 2 together, so everything I did on the first one, I'm being cautious and trying to do a better, more improved job on the second one. The first one was the Southwest style. This is the woven style. Now, I'm not really trying to do one in front of the other. I'm just doing what's available. But every time I do a stitch, I say to myself, I'm going to do it better than the previous time I've done it. And sewing machines in general are always very finicky. Thread bunches up underneath. I've seen people get very, very frustrated with sewing machines. It's important to keep your patience and just know that if somebody else has done it, I can do it. Now I need to do a strap that's going to become the handle on the end. And I go back to some of my scrap. And I typically, when I do a small strap like this, I'll do 3 inches and spray glue 1 inch in, and then the other inch over. Again, just using 77 spray glue. It does not mar up the machine. It doesn't build up on the needle. You'd be surprised. Now, other people wouldn't use spray glue. I just use it because it's just a resource I've been using for a long, long time. And now I run 2 stitches down it just to make them look even. Now, one is for one bag and one is for the other. And I know from the first bag that I made off camera that I need to give this a little camel bump in there. Otherwise, it's just about impossible to get your hand under if you don't prepare a little space. Another important lesson I learned from doing the first bag was that handle is floating deep inside your bag that's folded inside out. You don't know where it is. You go to sew it, and one side's crooked than the other side. So I said to myself, let me give it a little tiny stitch on each side that's going to get wrapped up in the seam allowance anyway, so that when I turn this inside out, it's going to be positioned correctly. And this is the pull tab. If you follow my Patreon, you saw me experiment with the prototype bag that I made off camera. And one thing I didn't figure out, or wasn't able to figure out, is how to sew one particular part of the bag. And in the end, I'll show you what I ended up doing. I just ended up using glue. And here you see me putting the zippers back in place. It takes a little bit of a second to get them to line up, because you want them to line up the way you had them when you first took the zipper shuttle off. And now it's important to cap the ends of these zippers so they don't become undone while you're turning the bag inside out or right side out. And it also helps keep the ends together when you go to do the finished part. It just gives it a cleaner look so they're not toggling, hanging around in space inside the bag. And here you can get a closer look at what I've done. And I'm using what's called a PVA glue. It's a bookbinder's glue, and that's the glue that I use a lot. Now, this is my first attempt at sewing these particular bags. This is the very first stitch on these bags, and I learned from my practice, off-camera practice, what and how to do. And I do a little bit more of a close-up. But I grab everything on the outside corners and pinch them together and do my best to stay. Now, you'll notice I start about a ½ inch up and I immediately go backwards and then I go forwards. So every stitch I make, I start and I come back. I always go about 4 stitches over into itself so that nothing becomes unthreaded from general usage. And every time I go backwards at the end of my stitch, I leave the machine in reverse, and then my next stitch starts a ½ inch up and I'm already going backwards. I don't know if that makes sense. I think this next stitch is a little bit different. You can see it up close. Oh, no, that was it. So here I'm turning the bag right side out. And this is always a wrestling match. And now right where the zipper dead ends into the part that I put a hem on, I don't have a stitch. Not, at least not in this one here. Now this is what I'm talking about. There's the handle. Now right behind the handle, the zipper goes behind that hem. And right now it's not stitched. I could wrestle it around the machine and try and get a stitch on it, but I don't want to put a stitch through the finished face because right now I'm considering it done. Now this is the Southwestern bag, which I just throw right into the machine. This is all one long take just to show how I do it. And thankfully the bobbin didn't run out. I was able to pull the thread out of the needle twice while I was doing it. But the bobbin was still holding strong. Bobbin always runs out as soon as the camera gets turned on. And here is the bag now at the other machine. You'll notice that was the 205, which is the big heavy duty machine. And I had to do that to go through all the layers that are at the end corner seams, which was several layers of leather and the liner. Now I'm popping it out, pushing it out as hard as I can, trying to get a good clean look. And right there where I poke my fingers is not sewn. So what I did on my prototype and what I'm going to do on these, I could throw a rivet in there, which I could still do, but what I've done with the one just behind this one and what I'm doing to that one is I'm stuffing it full of rags, and that's to give it the shape. And watch what I do. I take the PVA glue and I'm just making sure everything is pushing. I put the PVA glue in there and I wipe it. And that's just to make sure that it all stays in place. I could also hand stitch it, which maybe I'll do before the next take. I could certainly hand stitch it with a stitching fork. But for me, the cleanest way is to glue it first so nothing shifts around, because nothing's more frustrating than the material moving around while you're trying to sew or fasten or rivet. This, you can see, is the bag that I made off camera at the very beginning. This is where I got my education. You'll notice the handle's crooked. It's too tight. Now these are the next 2 bags I made. As I showed in the last clip, I glued this in here. So now this seam right here is glued in place. It's ready for me to hand stitch or put 2 rivets in there. It's going to stay in place. I'm not going to show you that in this video because it's sort of self-explanatory. This is the second and third one that I've ever made. And like I said, you go to school on the first few. I'll probably do a little bit more research to figure out how I could sew this in the process of using the sewing machine. But at this point, I wouldn't want to bring it back to the sewing machine because I would risk messing up this area, which right now to me looks finished. Pop a couple of classy looking rivets in there, or maybe just do a couple of little small hand stitches. But I'm going to consider these done right now in my learning process. I like the fact that I put the liner in it. That certainly helps the body and the shape. Here, the leather was thick enough. I did not need a liner in this one. The only way to get good at anything is to make it over and over and over. Especially if it's a design that is yours. I would consider these not my design. These are just online patterns that I found. The one thing I don't love about a Dopp kit, it doesn't seem to open up enough to comfortably get your hands in there. I personally never really liked this style of design. So many people are asking me about them, I thought, let me see what it might take to make one. I don't love making products to sell on the sewing machine because it's so easy to mess up. You can see there's a big scratch in this bag right here. And that was from me dragging the leather out from under the needle. Just a little scratch like that, in my opinion, this is no longer full price. This is discounted, and a lot of work goes into these. So that is why I personally try to make something that just gets fit together like my laser leather bags that you've seen in a previous video. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Weaver. I hope you learned something here today. I certainly did. I'm going to keep thinking on this design because that's the way my brain works. I can't honestly stop it. And I'll come up with some improvements. And if I do, I'll probably show it on my Patreon or my Instagram. So find me there, and thank you very much. Thank you, Weaver. And get your hands on some leather and make something.